The Rebel Capitalist Show.
If you could start by giving us kind of what you've been thinking about the most over the last couple weeks, how you see this, what we're dealing with right now from a standpoint of the global elite, the politicians, the games they're playing, the media, and then maybe how we can set up our portfolio to take advantage of their insanity.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover, so we'll try and encapsulate it. And for anyone listening, really the thing to do is to go back and look at a lot of the videos that you've been doing over the last month or so, which really, brings together a lot of the themes that you need to understand in order to kind of step forward. So if we go and we think about the last sort of major energy shock, that was when the Arabs pulled supply essentially, and at that time you didn't have a situation where there was an insufficient global supply of energy, but what there was an insufficient ability to move that supply.
This was back in the 70s, Chris?
Correct.
Yeah.
So and that that put things in a real spin. The global economy took a massive hit. Oil, I mean, it wasn't just oil. Energy, and of which oil is easily the largest component globally, translates into everything else. It translates into foodstuffs. It translates into the iPhone that you buy, because that's got to get transported. The components that are manufactured by it typically are brought out of the ground with diesel trucks and mining equipment and so on and so forth. So it's really kind of like largely the bedrock, if you will, of our global economy, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, a lot of people. I know a lot of people comment on my videos when I talk about gas prices going up, and they say, "Oh, well, I don't drive; it doesn't really affect me. I don't have a car." I'm like, "No, you don't understand."
Yeah, it is the underpinning to modern civilization. It's that really that simple. So if we go back and we think about that sort of scenario, what we saw there, we're having something of a similar description taking place now, except this time it is self-inflicted. That was an exogenous or an external event as a consequence of political dissatisfaction and so on and so forth. This time, what we have is something that's actually self-inflicted wound. And we can argue about whether it is by design, by the Malthusiast neo-Marxists, and their intent to exert greater control over the system and of us. Whether you believe that to be the case or not actually doesn't matter, because the reality is that it is transpiring, and we have to invest and try and position accordingly. So it's like the apple's falling off the tree, and we can choose to say, well, it was rotting, or the wind blew it, or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's falling off the tree. Deal with it. So that's kind of the situation that we're in today. It feels extraordinarily easy to identify what sectors we should be investing in. Part of that, it's a two-part process. One is just the physics matters, and mathematics and economics matters. And for anybody that pays even the slightest amount of attention, we will see that there are shortages in certain goods and surpluses in others. And so the other component, of course, is that there is so much that is extraordinarily overvalued as a consequence of this massive bull market in bonds that we've seen really since the 50s. And so it's meant that it's more difficult to make a case for investing in many asset classes. And so if you sort of just scrap and wipe away those that you say, well, it's not cheap, or, then there's not a whole lot that you're actually left with where you can go, okay, that makes some sense to me. So it does feel relatively easy to know what sectors we need to be invested into. what is, I think, most challenging, and is going to be something that we're just going to have to try and navigate on an ongoing basis, probably for the next decade, is more around the nuances of political and geographic, what's the word? Forces. Here's a good example. So I was on a phone call the other day with some clients of ours, and they're over in Wales. I got some real estate over there, quite a bit of real estate in Scotland and Wales, and so they've positioned themselves relatively well for dealing with an inflationary environment. They don't have a whole lot of debt on these properties. They've got good cash flow. They're in their late 60s. So they're kind of set up to be able to retire with strong income and a certain level of protection by holding assets that should, in a normal environment, at least keep pace with some inflation or an inflationary environment. Mm-hmm. The problem that they're having now is the socialists in these places are now putting in rent controls. Mm. And so what rent controls are going to do, they're going to constrict supply, obviously. Is what they do, because no logical thinking entrepreneur goes, oh, I'm going to dive into that when my income is capped. So it constricts the supply, but at the same time, it doesn't bring about additional capital into a market with constricted supply, which is your normal market mechanism, right? Because it doesn't. The entrepreneur sits there and goes, not going to do it. It doesn't make any sense.
And also, too, they let that property deteriorate. So then that reduces supply when it's deteriorated to a point where it's offline.
And the other component, of course, is if you do that at the same time that you're printing, right? Your now your income's capped at whatever it's capped at. Let's say you bought a property on a 10 cap, all right? And you go, oh, that's pretty good. I'm all right. Let's say inflation's running at 8, you say, well, I'm keeping ahead of the curve here. Well, if you're capped at your 10 and then they start inflating, it doesn't take you long before you're underwater.
Yeah, your expenses are not capped. Your income is.
Your expenses are not capped. Your income is capped. And the other component is it's difficult to get out. And so what you'll see people will do, and I've seen this if you go over and you look at where this has been done in the past, often in third world countries, people in those initial phases don't want to get out because they feel like they need to get back the value of their property. Because immediately what happens is the property prices fall. And so they're like, oh, it was worth $1 million. I kind of want at least that back. Not realizing that inflation's eating away the $1 million. And in 2 years' time, it's not $1 million, it's 900 or 880 or some other real value.
Purchasing power.
Your nominal value might stay the same. So these are the challenges. I'm just giving that as one example. These are the sorts of challenges I think that are going to be much more prevalent, and really we have to try and keep our bloody beady eye on the ball to be able to navigate that.